The Grand Council chamber of the Vector Dominion stretched half a kilometer in every direction. Crystalline beings moved through the space like living sculptures, their bodies refracting the light from 1,000 glowing orbs that floated near the vaulted ceiling. This was the heart of an empire that ruled 400 star systems, power that had stood unchallenged for 3,000 years. Ambassador Thalvin walked into the chamber with slow, deliberate steps. His species, the Quelm, were known across the galaxy as traders and diplomats. They traveled between the stars carrying goods and information, maintaining relationships with hundreds of different civilizations. Thalvin had seen many things in his long career, but nothing had disturbed him quite like what he had learned in recent months. The Vector High. Councils sat on elevated platforms arranged in a circle. Each council member was ancient, their crystalline bodies tinged with the deep purple color that came with age and wisdom. At the highest platform sat High Magistrate Krelvox, the supreme leader of the Dominion. His voice, when he spoke, resonated through the chamber like music played on glass instruments. Ambassador Thalvin Krelvox said, "You requested this emergency session. We have granted it, though our time is valuable. Speak." Thalvin activated a holographic display. Images appeared in the air above the council chamber floor. The first image showed a yellow star with several planets orbiting it. "This is the Sol system," Thalvin began. "It lies in the outer reaches of your territory in a region you consider barely worth your attention. 50 of your cycles ago, a new species achieved faster-than-light travel and began establishing colonies in nearby systems. We are aware of the humans," one council member said dismissively. "Primitive creatures. Their technology is centuries behind ours." "That is precisely why I am here," Thalvin said, his voice urgent. "You must not underestimate them. In my travels I have gathered reports from 17 different sources. I have spoken with species who have encountered humans. I have seen what they are capable of." Holographic display changed, showing images of human beings. They looked fragile compared to most spacefaring species, with soft skin and no natural armor. They stood upright on 2 legs, with 2 arms and a head that seemed almost comically large for their body size. "They look weak," another council member observed. "They are not," Thalvin said firmly. "Their homeworld is what we call a death world. The gravity is crushing, the weather is violent, and the planet is filled with predators. Humans evolved in an environment that would kill most civilized species within days. Their bodies heal from injuries that would be fatal to others. They can run for hours without stopping. They can survive in extreme heat and extreme cold. They need very little sleep." Krelvox leaned forward slightly. "You speak as if these primitives concern you, Ambassador. Why?" Thalvin changed the holographic display again. This time, it showed a report from a Vector survey ship that had visited human colonies in the border regions. 3 months ago, your survey teams encountered human settlements on 3 different worlds. In each case, your teams attempted to assert Dominion authority. In each case, the humans refused to acknowledge your claim. When your teams tried to enforce compliance, the humans drove them away. Drove them away? Krelvox's voice carried a note of amusement. "A handful of colonists with primitive weapons drove away Vector survey teams? This seems unlikely," Thalvin insisted, "and it should terrify you. The humans didn't just fight back. They fought with a ferocity that shocked your officers. When their weapons failed, they used tools and machinery as weapons. When those failed, they used their bare hands. Your reports indicate that human colonists were willing to die rather than submit." The council chamber filled with the sound of crystalline laughter, a tinkling like breaking glass. "You want us to fear them because they are stubborn?" a council member asked. Thalvin's frustration was evident. "You don't understand. I have studied hundreds of species. I've never encountered anything like human psychology. They possess something they call spite. When they are losing, they are outmatched. When any rational being would surrender, humans fight harder. They become more dangerous when they are cornered. And they never, ever forget an enemy." He pulled up more data, showing human history. On their own world, they fought wars for thousands of years. They developed weapons that could destroy their entire planet. They created military strategies of terrifying complexity. They have a saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. These are not peaceful farmers you can easily subjugate. Krelvok studied the data for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his tone was final. Ambassador Thalvin, we appreciate your concern. But the Vector Dominion has conquered species far more advanced than these humans. 2 centuries ago, we defeated the Horth Collective, whose weapons technology exceeded even our own. We absorbed their empire in less than 5 years. These humans have barely left their home system. They have no unified government, just scattered colonies. They have no fleet worth mentioning. They pose no threat to us. You're making a mistake, Thalvin said desperately. I know you think I'm protecting my trade routes, but I'm trying to save lives. Human lives. Vector lives. If you push them, if you threaten their colonies, they will respond with violence you cannot imagine. Then they will be destroyed, Krelvok said simply. The border systems contain resources we require. The human presence there is unauthorized and illegal. We will give them one chance to submit peacefully. If they refuse, we will remove them. Peace, Thalvin said. At least send a diplomatic mission first. Talk to them. Understand what they are before you act. Krelvox rose from his platform, signaling that the discussion was over. The council has made its decision. Fleet Commander Genkar will take a subjugation force to the border systems. 50 warships should be more than sufficient to handle a few primitive colonies. The humans will submit, or they will be eliminated. This is not a matter for further debate. Thalvin bowed, knowing he had failed. As he left the chamber, he activated his personal communicator and sent a message to his contacts in the neutral zones. The message was simple. The Vector are going to war with humanity. Avoid the border systems. What comes next will not be pleasant. In another part of the galaxy, on a small colony world, humans had named New Busan. A young engineer named Jiwoo was working on a terraforming reactor. She had no idea that her life was about to change forever. On the bridge of a colony ship called the Indomitable, Captain Hanzal received an urgent message from long-range sensors. A Vector fleet was approaching. He stared at the display for a long moment, then activated the ship-wide communication system. All hands, this is the captain. We have incoming hostiles. Battle stations. Far away, in a command center on one of humanity's core colonies, Admiral Tejon received simultaneous reports from multiple systems. The Vector were coming. He had perhaps a week to prepare a defense against an empire that ruled 400 worlds. He looked at the star map on his display. At the tiny cluster of human colonies scattered across a dozen systems, they had no chance. Not really. But humans had never let impossible odds stop them before. Tejon began issuing orders. Every ship would be armed. Every colonist would fight. If the Vector wanted war, humanity would give them one they would never forget. The first shots hadn't been fired yet, but the war had already begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. Fleet Commander Genkar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the human colony world grow larger on the view screen. New Busan was a small planet, barely terraformed, with a population of maybe 50,000 humans. His fleet of 25 warships could reduce it to ash in an hour. This would be easy. Too easy, perhaps? Genkar had hoped for more of a challenge, something worthy of his reputation. But orders were orders. The humans had refused to acknowledge Vector authority, so they would be taught a lesson. Send the standard surrender demand, Genkar ordered. His communication officer transmitted the message. It was simple and direct. Submit to the Dominion, or be destroyed. You have 1 hour to respond. The response came back in 30 seconds. No, just one word. Genkar felt a flicker of surprise. Usually there were negotiations, pleading, offers of compromise. But the humans had simply said no. Very well, Genkar said. Begin the assault. On New Busan, Captain Hanzal watched the Vector fleet from the bridge of the Indomitable. His ship was a colony vessel, not a warship. It had been designed to carry people and supplies between stars, not fight battles. But it had engines, and it had a hull, and that would have to be enough. All civilian ships are evacuating non-combatants to the underground shelters, his first officer reported. "We have 19 vessels willing to fight. Mining ships, cargo haulers, even a few personal yachts. They're all armed with whatever we could mount." Hansal nodded. 19 ships against 25 Vector warships. The math was not encouraging, but math had never stopped humans before. "Position us directly in their approach path," Hansal ordered. "Everyone else forms up behind us. Make them go through us to reach the planet." Down on the surface, Giwu was running through the colony's main terraforming facility. She and 3 other engineers had been working non-stop for the past 6 hours, ever since the Vector fleet appeared on sensors. "Are you sure this will work?" one of the other engineers asked. "No," Gu admitted. "But if they land troops here, we can't let them take the facility intact. The reactors contain enough energy to level half the colony. If we rig them properly, we can turn that into a weapon." "We'll die," the engineer pointed out. "We'll die anyway if we lose," Giwu said. "At least this way we take some of them with us." The battle began with a flash of light. Vector plasma weapons reached across the void and struck the Indomitable's shields. The ship shuddered. Warning alarms screamed. Hansel gripped the armrests of his command chair and watched the shield. Strength dropped from 100% to 70% in seconds. "Return fire," he ordered calmly. The Indomitable's makeshift weapons, mining lasers and kinetic cannons meant for breaking apart asteroids, fired back. The beam struck a Vector cruiser and barely scratched its shields. But Hansal hadn't expected to hurt them. He just needed to buy time. The other human ships joined the fight. They scattered, moving in patterns that seemed random but weren't. They were using civilian traffic control algorithms modified for combat. The Vector fleet tried to target them, but the humans kept changing position, never staying still long enough to be hit cleanly. One of the mining ships, an ancient vessel called Lucky Strike, charged straight at a Vector destroyer. The Vector ship fired, tearing through the mining ship's hull. But the Lucky Strike didn't stop. It couldn't stop anymore. Its engines had been locked at full thrust. The ship slammed into the destroyer at a significant fraction of light speed. Both vessels exploded in a sphere of white light. Jenkar stared at the explosion. "Did that human ship just ram us intentionally?" "Yes, Commander," his tactical officer confirmed. "They sacrificed their own ship to destroy ours." "Insane," Jenkar muttered. But he felt a cold sensation in his crystalline core. These humans were supposed to surrender. They were supposed to be rational. Instead, they were throwing themselves at his fleet-like weapons. The battle raged for hours. The humans couldn't win. Their ships were too weak, their weapons too primitive. One by one, the civilian vessels were disabled or destroyed. But they didn't retreat. They fought until their ships were crippled. Then they evacuated 2 shuttles and tried to ram those 2. The Indomitable took hit after hit. Hansel's ship was dying around him. Half the crew was dead. Life support was failing. But he kept fighting. "Captain," his first officer said quietly, "it's over. We should evacuate." Hansal looked at the tactical display. Only 3 human ships were still fighting. The Vector fleet was battered but intact. The planet below was defenseless. "No," Hansal said. "We're not done yet." He opened a communication channel to every human colony in range. "This is Captain Hansel of the Indomitable. New Busan is falling. But before we go, I'm transmitting everything we learned. Every weakness in their ships. Every tactic that worked. Every mistake they made. Use it. Make them pay for every meter they take." He uploaded the tactical data, then turned to his helmsman. "Set a collision course with the flagship. Maximum speed." "Captain, we can't survive that," the helmsman protested. "I know," Hansal said. "Do it anyway." The Indomitable's engines roared to life one last time. The battered colony ship accelerated toward Jenkar's flagship. Alarms blared on the Vector vessel. Point defense weapons opened fire, tearing chunks from the Indomitable's hull. But the ship kept coming. Jenkar watched in horror as the human vessel filled his view screen. At the last second, he saw Captain Hansel on the bridge, standing calmly as death approached. Then the Indomitable struck. The explosion tore through both ships. Jenkar died instantly, along with most of his command staff. The flagship broke apart, spilling debris and bodies into space. On New Bazan's surface, Vector troops landed in assault shuttles. They secured the spaceport quickly, meeting only scattered resistance. Then they moved toward the terraforming facility where Jiwoo waited. The facility was empty when they arrived. Too empty. A Vector officer noticed the humming sound coming from the reactor core and realized too late what the humans had done. Jiwoo pressed the detonator from her hiding spot to kilometers away. She had just enough time to think, "I hope this hurts," before the explosion vaporized everything within 3 kilometers. The Vector landing force was decimated. The surviving ships in orbit, now under the command of a junior officer who had never expected to be in charge, decided to complete their mission anyway. They bombarded the remaining human positions from orbit. New Busan fell after 3 weeks of fighting, but the cost had been terrible. 12 Vector warships destroyed. Thousands of troops dead. The humans, with their primitive weapons and civilian ships, had inflicted casualties at a rate of 10 to 1. On the Vector homeworld, High Magistrate Krell Vox reviewed the battle reports with growing unease. This wasn't how subjugation was supposed to go. The humans should have surrendered after the first engagement. Instead, they had fought with a savagery that seemed impossible for such a weak species. "Send a larger fleet," Krell Vox ordered. 200 ships under General Mikther. Crush any remaining human resistance quickly. But across human space, Admiral Taejan was reading Captain Hanzol's final transmission. The tactical data was invaluable. Now humanity knew how Vector shields worked, how their weapons operated, where their ships were vulnerable. Taejan composed a message to every human colony, every ship, every outpost. "Vector think they can intimidate us. They think we'll surrender if they hurt us enough. They're wrong. We're going to show them what happens when you threaten humanity. Every colonist becomes a soldier. Every ship becomes a weapon. We don't have their technology, but we have something better. We have each other, and we will never give up." He promoted a young tactical officer named Hyan-Woo to lead special operations. Hyan-Woo had a gift for unconventional warfare, for thinking in ways the enemy couldn't predict. The Vector had won the Battle of New Busan, but Captain Hanzol's last message had given humanity something more valuable than victory. It had given them hope and data, and a burning desire for revenge. The war had truly begun. 6 months had passed since New Busan fell. The war had spread across 12 star systems like a disease. General Mikther commanded a fleet of 200 warships, the largest Vector force assembled in a century. He had expected to crush human resistance within weeks. Instead, he was fighting a war unlike anything in Vector history. Commander Hyan-Woo floated in the darkness between stars, watching a Vector supply convoy pass below his position. His ship, barely larger than a shuttle, was powered down completely. No engines, no weapons, no life support beyond the bare minimum. Just cold metal drifting in space like a piece of debris. He waited until the convoy was exactly where he wanted it. Then he activated his engines. The small ship darted toward the convoy like a striking snake. Hyan-Woo's crew fired precisely targeted missiles at the weakest points in the Vector ship's shields. The vulnerabilities Captain Hanzal had identified in his final transmission. 2 supply vessels exploded. A third began venting atmosphere. The Vector escort scrambled to respond, but Hyan-Woo was already gone, his ship vanishing into the darkness before they could get a weapons locked. This was the new human way of war. Hit and run, strike from nowhere, disappear before the enemy could retaliate. Hyan-Woo had perfected it. His irregular forces operated from hidden bases in asteroid fields and the outer reaches of star systems. They attacked supply lines, ambushed patrol ships, and made it impossible for the Vector to hold conquered territory. General Mikther reviewed the reports in his command center with growing frustration. In 6 months, he had occupied 7 human colonies, but he couldn't actually control them. Human insurgents infiltrated his bases, sabotaged equipment. They killed Vector soldiers in the night and vanished before dawn. "How are they doing this?" Mikther demanded. "We have superior sensors, superior weapons, superior numbers. How are these primitives evading us?" His intelligence officer displayed a hologram. "They're using tactics we've never encountered before, General. They don't fight fair. They hide among civilian populations. They attack when we're off guard. And they seem to know our patrol routes before we do." "Then change the patrol routes," Mikther said. "We have, General, multiple times. Adapt faster than we can compensate." What the intelligence officer didn't know was that humans had infiltrated the Vector occupation forces in ways the aliens couldn't imagine. Humans look different from most species, but many aliens look different from each other too. A human in the right clothing, with the right papers, could blend into the subjugated populations on occupied worlds. They watched. They learned. They sent information back to Hyanwu's forces, Admiral. Tajan studied the strategic situation from his headquarters on a heavily defended human colony. The news was mixed. Humanity was losing territory, but the Vector were paying dearly for every system they took. More importantly, other species were watching. The Vector Dominion's reputation had been built on swift, overwhelming victories. But humanity's resistance was making them look weak. 3 minor species on the Dominion's borders had stopped paying tribute. Whispers of rebellion were spreading. Taechun's communication officer interrupted his thoughts. "Admiral, we have a priority message from Captain Dayun. She says she has a plan for Vector Station Omega." Taejan pulled up the relevant data. Station Omega was a massive military installation at the junction of 4 star systems. The Vector had fortified it heavily, turning it into an unassailable stronghold. Thousands of troops, hundreds of defensive platforms, overlapping shields that could withstand sustained bombardment. "Connect me to Dayun," Taejun ordered. Captain Dayun's face appeared on the holographic display. She was young for her rank, barely 30, but she had proven herself to be a brilliant tactical mind. "Admiral, I've been studying Omega for 3 months," Dayun said, without preamble. "It's impossible to attack conventionally, but I think I found a way in." She displayed a star chart. Omega is positioned near a red giant star. The Vector chose the location because the star's radiation interferes with long-range sensors. It's a defensive advantage, but it's also a weakness. "Go on," Taejan said. "Human ships can tolerate higher radiation levels than Vector vessels," Dayun explained. "It's because we evolved on a death world. Our shielding is designed differently. If we approach through the star's corona, we can get close before they detect us." "You want to fly through a star?" Taejan asked. "Through its outer layers?" "Yes," Dayun said. "It will be dangerous. We'll take casualties from the radiation alone, but if we time it right, we can hit Omega before they know we're coming." Taejan considered the plan. It was insane. It was also the kind of thinking that had kept humanity alive this long. "How many ships do you need?" he asked. "Every combat vessel we can spare," Dayun replied. "This isn't a raid. This is an assault. If we take Omega, we cut the Vector supply lines in half. General Mikther will be isolated from reinforcements." Taejan approved the plan. 2 weeks later, Dayun led a fleet of 60 human warships toward the Red Giant. They were a mixed group. Proper military vessels, armed colony ships, even a few corporate security frigates. Every ship humanity could scrape together for this desperate gamble. The approach through the star's corona was hell. The radiation cooked the outer hulls of the ships. Temperature inside the vessels climbed dangerously high. 3 ships had to break off, their cooling systems failing. 2 more were lost when their shields collapsed completely. But 55 ships merged from the radiation storm directly on top of Vector Station Omega. The station's defenders scrambled to respond, but they had only seconds of warning. Human ships opened fire at point-blank range. Missiles, lasers, kinetic rounds, everything they had. The station's shields flared and buckled under the unexpected assault. Dayun's flagship, the Defiant, led the charge. She targeted the station's shield generators with precision strikes, using the tactical data humanity had been gathering for months. One by one, the generators exploded. General Mikther, who happened to be visiting the station for a strategic conference, ordered an immediate counterattack. Vector ships poured out of the station's hangars. A brutal close-quarters battle erupted. The fighting lasted 72 hours. Human ships rammed Vector vessels when their weapons ran dry. Vector defenders tried to repel boarding parties, but humans were terrifying in close combat. They fought with knives when ammunition ran out. They fought with their hands when weapons were lost. On the third day, human boarding team breached the station's command center. General Micther found himself facing a dozen armed humans in combat armor. He reached for a weapon, but one of the humans was faster. "Don't," the human said in perfect Vector language. "You're more valuable alive." Micther was taken prisoner. It was an unprecedented humiliation. No Vector general had been captured in 400 years. The battle ended with Station Omega in human hands. The cost had been terrible. 40 of the 55 human ships were destroyed or too damaged to repair. 20,000 human casualties. But the strategic victory was immense. Admiral Tejon sent a specialist named Yunji to interrogate Micther. Yunji was an expert in psychology and negotiation. She didn't torture the general. She didn't need to. She simply asked him questions and listened carefully to his answers. "Why are you fighting us?" Yunji asked during one session. "Because you refused to submit to the Dominion?" Micther replied. "No," Yunji said. Why are you still fighting?" "You've lost more ships in 6 months than you lost in the last century. Your economy is straining under the war's cost. Your people are questioning whether this is worth it. So why continue?" Micther was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised even himself, "Because we don't know how to stop. The Vector don't lose wars. We've never lost a war. If we make peace with you now, it will look like weakness. Other species will rebel. The Dominion will collapse. So you'd rather die than look weak?" Yunji asked. "Wouldn't you?" Micther countered. Yunji smiled sadly. "General, we've been dying rather than look weak for the past 6 months. The difference is, we're dying to protect our homes. You're dying to protect your pride. One of those is worth it. The other isn't." She let that sink in, then asked another question. "What do you think the Vector High Council will do when they learn you've been captured?" "They'll send more ships," Micther said. "They'll escalate. High Magistrate Krelvox won't accept this defeat." "Good," Yunji said, "because we're counting on it." Micther looked at her in confusion. "What?" "The more ships they send, the more ships we destroy," Yunji explained. "Every battle costs you more than it costs us. We're fighting for survival. You're fighting for territory. We'll never stop. Never. Eventually, you'll run out of ships, or patience, or political will. And then we'll win." Back on the Vector homeworld, High Magistrate Krelvox received the news of Micther's capture with cold fury. The High Council was in uproar. Some members were calling for peace negotiations. Others wanted total war. Krelvox made a decision that would doom his empire. He would personally lead the Grand Fleet to Earth itself. 800 warships, the largest armada in Vector history. He would threaten the human homeworld and force them to surrender. It was the only way to salvage Vector pride, Commander Hyenwu received intelligence about the Grand Fleet's formation and sent an urgent message to Admiral Tejun. "They're coming for Earth. Everything they have." Taijon looked at the numbers. 800 ships. He had perhaps 100 combat-capable vessels in all of human space. The math was impossible, but humans had never cared much about math. Recall every ship Taijon ordered. Every captain, every crew, every vessel that can fly. We're going home. If they want Earth, they're going to have to go through all of us. High Magistrate Krelvox stood on the bridge of his command, Dreadnought, as the Grand Fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system. 800 warships materialized in perfect formation, their weapons charged and shields at maximum. It was the most powerful force the Vector Dominion had assembled in its entire history. "There it is," Krelvox said, staring at the small blue planet in the distance. "Earth, the human homeworld. Today, we end this war." His fleet began the slow advance toward the inner system. Every sensor was active, scanning for the human defense fleet. Krelvox expected them to be positioned near Earth, ready for a desperate last stand. What he found instead made him pause. Earth was surrounded by a defensive network that defied belief. Every orbital platform had been converted into a weapons battery. Satellites that had once been used for communication now carried missiles. The moon itself bristled with enormous railguns, their barrels pointed toward space. Millions of automated drones formed a sphere around the planet, each one carrying explosives or kinetic weapons. And beyond that sphere, waiting in orbital positions, was every human warship that could fly. Admiral Tejan had called them all home. Colony defense ships, merchant vessels with welded-on weapons, mining ships converted to missile platforms, even antique warships from Earth's pre-spaceflight era that had been restored and upgraded. 163 vessels in total, crewed by everyone humanity could spare. Captain Dayun commanded the defensive fleet from the Defiant, her flagship. The ship had been repaired after the battle for Station Omega, though it still bore scars from that fight. She looked at the tactical display showing the Vector Armada and felt her stomach tighten. 800 to 163. The odds were even worse than she'd feared. "All ships, this is Captain Dayun," she transmitted. "Hold your positions. Make them come to us. Every second we delay is another second for civilians to evacuate to the shelters." On Earth's surface, people were indeed evacuating. Not everyone, though. Millions had volunteered to stay and fight. They manned the orbital weapons platforms. They loaded ammunition for the lunar railguns. They piloted the drone swarms. Every human who could hold a weapon or operate a control panel had chosen to stand and defend their homeworld. Krelvok studied the human defenses and felt a flicker of doubt. This wasn't the desperate resistance of a dying species. This was a prepared, organized defense. But he had come too far to turn back now. "All ships advance," he ordered. "Break through their outer defenses and target the planet's major cities. Once Earth burns, the rest of humanity will surrender." The Vector fleet accelerated. The Battle of Seoul had begun. The first wave of human defenses activated when the Vector fleet reached the outer marker. Thousands of drones swarmed forward, their simple programming focused on a single goal: find a Vector ship and explode. Most were destroyed by Vector point defense systems. But there were so many drones that some got through. Small explosions rippled across the Vector formation, then the human ships opened fire. Dayun had positioned her fleet carefully, using Earth's gravity well and the Moon's orbital path to create overlapping fields of fire. Human vessels attacked in coordinated groups, focusing their weapons on single Vector ships to overwhelm shields. The Vector returned fire with devastating effect. Human ships, lighter and less armored than their opponents, took terrible damage. Within the first hour, 20 human vessels were destroyed, but humanity had learned how to fight over months of bitter warfare. When shields failed, human ships didn't retreat. They accelerated toward the enemy, ramming when weapons were gone. When life support failed, crews evacuated in shuttles, and those shuttles became improvised missiles. A young pilot named Biora flew a fighter craft through the Vector formation with reckless precision. She had been a civilian racing pilot before the war. Now she used those skills to dodge plasma bolts and slip through shields at the last moment. Firing missiles directly into Vector engine ports, she destroyed 11 enemy ships before her fighter took a direct hit that tore off one wing. Bora ejected seconds before her craft exploded. Her escape pod tumbled through space, but she was still transmitting targeting data to other human ships. Right up until the moment rescue teams retrieved her, the battle raged for 3 days without pause. The Vector had superior weapons and shields, but the humans had position and desperation. They used the sun's gravity to slingshot missiles at incredible velocities. They used Earth's magnetic field to disrupt Vector sensors. They even redirected asteroids from the belt, turning them into massive kinetic weapons. On the Moon, the railgun crews worked in shifts that never ended. The weapons fired solid projectiles at a fraction of light speed. Each shot required enormous power, and the guns overheated frequently. But the crews kept firing. When one gun melted from overuse, they moved to the next one. Specialist UNG. The psychological warfare expert who had interrogated General Micther was coordinating a different kind of battle. She broadcast messages on all vector communication frequencies. The messages included footage of General Micther's interrogation, edited to highlight his admission that the war was unwinnable. She included casualty reports that Krelvox had hidden from his own people. She showed recordings of human determination, civilians singing as they loaded ammunition, engineers working 30-hour shifts to keep weapons operational, children writing messages on missiles that said "For New Busan" and "For Captain Hansel." The final message was simple and devastating. Yonji spoke directly to the Vector fleet in their own language. "Ash! You can kill us," she said. "You can destroy our ships. You can bomb our cities. But you cannot make us stop. We will fight you here at Earth. We will fight you at every colony. We will fight you in every asteroid field and on every moon. We will never surrender. Never. The question you must ask yourselves is, how much are you willing to lose? How many ships? How many lives? For what? For pride? For territory you can't hold? We're fighting for our survival. What are you fighting for?" The message spread through the Vector fleet. Crew members watched it in their quarters. Officers discussed it in hushed conversations. Some began to doubt. On the third day of battle, a group of Vector ship captains broke formation and withdrew from the fight. Then more followed. The unity of the Grand Fleet was fracturing. Krelvox watched in horror as his armada began to fall apart. He had lost over 400 ships. Earth was still defended, and now his own captains were refusing to fight. "Cowards!" he screamed. All ships resumed the attack immediately, but the order was ignored. More ships were withdrawing, jumping to faster than light speed and fleeing the battle in desperation. Krelvox made a final fatal decision. Set course for Earth. Maximum speed. All power to engines and forward shields. We will ram their defensive grid. His flagship, a massive dreadnought, 3 kilometers long, accelerated toward Earth. The human defenders saw it coming. "He's going for a suicide run," Dayun's tactical officer reported. "If he hits the orbital platforms, he'll break through to the surface. The impact alone could kill millions." Dayun didn't hesitate. "All ships, intercept course. We stop him here." The Defiant and 15 other human vessels positioned themselves in Krelvox's path. They opened fire with everything they had, trying to damage the dreadnought's engines. But the ship's forward shields were too strong. "It's not working," Dayun's first officer said. "He's going to get through." Dayun looked at her crew. They were exhausted, injured, some barely conscious at their stations. They had fought for 3 days straight, and now she was going to ask them to die. "Prepare for ramming speed," Dayun ordered quietly. "Captain, we can't survive that," her helmsman protested. "No," Dayun said, "but Earth will. Engage." The Defiant accelerated directly toward Krelvox's flagship. The two ships closed at incredible speed. Krelvox saw the human vessel coming and tried to evade. But his ship was too large and moving too fast. The collision happened 3,000 kilometers above Earth's surface. The Defiant struck the dreadnought near its bridge section. Both ships exploded in a flash of light visible from the planet below. Captain Dayun's final transmission, sent in the millisecond before impact, contained only 2 words: "Worth it." The explosion destroyed Krelvox's flagship and killed the High Magistrate. Without his leadership, the remaining Vector fleet lost all cohesion. Ships jumped to faster than light speed in random directions, fleeing for their lives. The Battle of Seoul was over. Earth had survived. Admiral Tajan stood in the command center, staring at the casualty reports. 4 million humans dead. 90 vessels destroyed. But Earth still stood. On the view screen, he could see the debris field where the Defiant had made its final stand. He composed a message that would be sent to every human colony. "Today, we proved something important. We proved that humanity will never be conquered. We lost Captain Dayun and Captain Hanzol and Jiwoo and thousands of others whose names we will remember forever. They gave everything so that we could be free. And we will honor them by making sure this war ends now. Not with our destruction, but with peace. But Admiral Taejeon knew the war wasn't quite over yet. The Vector Dominion was reeling, leaderless, fragmenting. The question now was, what would humanity do with its victory? Would they seek revenge, or would they seek peace? In 3 years, the galaxy would have its answer. 3 years had passed since the Battle of Seoul. The galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The Vector Dominion, an empire that had stood for 3,000 years, was collapsing. Admiral Taejeon stood before a window in his office, looking out at the stars. His hair had gone gray during the war. His face bore scars from the battle where his command ship had been boarded by Vector troops. He was 52 years old and felt twice that age. Behind him, his staff was preparing for the most important diplomatic mission in human history. Tomorrow, Taejeon would lead a delegation to what remained of the Vector capital. The war was officially over. Now came the harder part, building a peace. "Admiral, the shuttle is ready," his aide said. "The delegation is assembled." Adija nodded. He had chosen his companions carefully. Commander Hyeonwoo, now a general, whose guerrilla tactics had bled the Vector fleet dry. Specialist Yeonji, whose psychological warfare had fractured their unity. A young diplomat named Minsu, brilliant and idealistic, who would help negotiate the actual treaty. And Biora, fighter pilot who had become a symbol of human tenacity after destroying 11 enemy ships in a single battle. The shuttle journey to the Vector homeworld took 2 days. Taejeon spent the time reviewing reports about what had happened to the Dominion after Krelvox's death. The collapse had been swift and total. Without the High Magistrate's iron leadership, the Vector High Council had fractured into competing factions. Some wanted to continue the war. Others sought peace. Most were simply trying to survive. 40% of Vector systems had declared independence or been conquered by neighboring species who saw an opportunity. The species that had been subjugated for centuries, who had paid tribute and bowed to Vector authority, suddenly remembered they had teeth. They rose up in rebellion. Civil war had erupted within Vector space. Military commanders fought each other for control. Trade routes collapsed. The economy, strained by years of war spending, simply broke. Food shortages led to riots. Riots led to more violence. The once mighty Dominion had become a collection of squabbling city-states, each claiming to be the legitimate government. The irony wasn't lost on Taejeon. The Vector had dismissed humanity as divided and weak because they lacked a unified government. Now the Dominion was experiencing that same division. It was tearing them apart. The shuttle arrived at the Vector homeworld to find a planet in crisis. The cities below showed signs of damage from internal fighting. The orbital defenses that had once been impenetrable were now scattered wreckage. A small escort of Vector ships met the human shuttle and guided it to the surface. Taejeon and his delegation were taken to what had once been the Grand Council chamber. The crystalline spires were cracked now. Some had collapsed entirely. The floating orbs that provided light flickered weakly. Magistrate Velkin waited for them in the chamber. He represented the largest remaining Vector faction, controlling perhaps 30 systems. He looked diminished compared to the grandeur Krelvox had displayed. His crystalline body was dulled with stress and age. Admiral Taejeon Velkin said in the musical Vector language, "Welcome. I apologize for the state of our world. We have fallen on difficult times." "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Taejeon replied through his translator. "We're here to discuss peace terms." They moved to a negotiating chamber. Minsu, the young diplomat, laid out humanity's requirements. The list was extensive but fair. Immediate cessation of all hostilities. Vector war criminals to face a galactic tribunal. Reparations for destroyed human colonies. A permanent peace treaty with mutual defense clauses. And technology exchange programs then listened to it all and then asked a question that seemed to genuinely puzzle him. "Why aren't you demanding our unconditional surrender? You won. You could occupy our worlds, subjugate our people, turn us into your servants. That's what we would have done to you. Why offer us peace instead of conquest?" Taejeon leaned forward. "Because we're not you. We didn't fight this war to build an empire. We fought because you threatened our survival. Now the war is over. You're no longer a threat. Conquering you would just create new enemies and new wars. We'd rather have you as partners than corpses, partners. Velkin seemed shocked by the word. After everything we did to you? You murdered millions of our people, General Hyenwu said, his voice hard. You destroyed our colonies. You tried to exterminate us. Yes, we remember all of that. We'll never forget it. But we also remember that most Vector soldiers were just following orders. We remember that your own people suffered under Krelvox's arrogance, and we remember that revenge only leads to more war, Unji added. Besides, the galaxy is watching this negotiation. If we're merciful in victory, other species will trust us. If we're cruel, they'll fear us. We'd rather be trusted than feared. The negotiations continued for 3 days. Velkin agreed to most of humanity's terms. In exchange, humanity offered something unexpected: aid. Food shipments to Vector worlds suffering from famine. Medical supplies. Even engineering assistance to rebuild damaged infrastructure. How you would help us rebuild? Velkin asked. Even after we tried to destroy you? Of course, Minsu said. A stable Vector government is in everyone's interest. Chaos in this region hurts everyone. We're offering help not out of charity, but out of practical necessity. On the 4th day, a holographic communication arrived. Ambassador Thalvin of the Quelm appeared in the negotiating chamber. He looked older than when he had warned the Vector High Council 3 years ago, but there was satisfaction in his expression. Admiral Tajin, Thalvin said, I wanted to address this assembly, if I may. Please do, Tajin said. Thalvin turned to look at Velkin. 3 years ago, I came to this very chamber and warned High Magistrate Krelvox about humanity. I told him they were dangerous. I told him they would fight with a ferocity he couldn't imagine. He dismissed my warning. He thought humans were weak and primitive. And now, an empire that stood for 3,000 years lies in ruins. The Quelm ambassador paused, then continued. But I didn't tell Krelvox everything about humans. I didn't tell him that they are capable of incredible mercy as well as incredible violence. I didn't tell him that they fight to protect, not to conquer. I didn't tell him that they understand something most species forget, that peace is more valuable than victory. Thalvin looked at Taejun. The galaxy must now decide what to do about humanity. Are they a threat to be feared? Or allies to stand beside? I know my answer. The Quelm Confederation formally recognizes humanity as a galactic power and offers our friendship. The treaty was signed the next day. The war between humanity and the Vector Dominion officially ended. Reparations would be paid over 20 years. War criminals would face justice. And most surprisingly, a mutual defense pact was established. If either species was attacked, the other would come to their aid. News of the treaty spread across the galaxy. The reaction was mixed. Some species praised humanity's mercy. Others saw it as weakness. But everyone agreed on one thing: humanity changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. 6 months after the treaty signing, monuments were erected on Earth to honor the fallen. Captain Hansal's name was carved in stone alongside GU's, Captain Du's, and thousands of others who had died defending humanity's freedom. Bara attended the dedication ceremony for the monument to Captain Dayun. She stood in her dress uniform, her chest covered in medals she'd earned during the war, and read the inscription aloud. She gave everything so that Earth could live. Her sacrifice will never be forgotten. On New Busan, which had been the first colony to fall, reconstruction was complete. The city had been rebuilt with both human and Vector volunteers working side by side. A memorial park honored the colonists who died in the first battle, including Jiwoo. Her name was listed among hundreds of others, ordinary people who became heroes. In Vector space, young students studied human history in their classrooms. They learned about the war from the Vector perspective, but also from the human one. They learned what happens when you underestimate your opponents. They learned that arrogance leads to defeat. The Galactic Council, a loose assembly of spacefaring species, offered humanity a permanent seat. General Hyenwu attended the first session as humanity's representative. He stood before hundreds of alien delegates and delivered a speech that would be remembered for generations. "We came to the stars seeking knowledge and friendship," Hyen-Woo said. "What we found was war. We didn't choose it. We didn't want it. But when threatened, we showed the galaxy what humans are capable of. We're survivors. We adapt. We overcome. We never give up." He paused, looking around the chamber. "But we also showed you something else. We showed you that we can be merciful in victory. We could have destroyed the Vector. We chose not to. We could have built an empire on their ruins. We chose not to. We want to be part of this galactic community, not its conquerors." The speech received a standing ovation. But not everyone was convinced. Some species still feared humanity. Others respected them. Some wanted to test them, to see if their reputation was deserved. The galaxy would watch humanity carefully in the coming years. Every action would be scrutinized. Every decision would be judged. But for now, humanity had earned something precious. Respect, Min-Soo. The young diplomat who had helped negotiate the peace found himself in high demand. Other species wanted human diplomats to help mediate their own conflicts. The techniques Yonji had developed for psychological warfare were being adapted for peaceful negotiation. The tactical innovations Hyen-Woo had created were being studied in military academies across the galaxy. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage not as conquerors, but as equals. On a distant world, far from Earth and the Vector homeworld. A parent and child looked up at the stars together. The child asked a question that children had been asking for thousands of years. Is the story about humans true? Did they really defeat an empire? The parent considered the question carefully. They didn't defeat it alone, child. The empire defeated itself through arrogance and pride. The humans simply survived it. And in surviving, they changed the galaxy forever. Are humans scary? The child asked. Yes, the parent admitted. They can be terrifying when threatened, but they can also be kind and generous and forgiving. They are paradoxes, terrors and wonders at the same time. And we must never forget that. The child thought about this. Should we be afraid of them? No, the parent said. We should respect them. There's a difference. Admiral Taejon retired from active service 1 year after the war ended. He had done his duty. He had led humanity through its darkest hour and emerged victorious. Now it was time for younger people to lead. He spent his retirement writing a book about the war. It was titled The Cost of Arrogance: Lessons from the Vector War. The book became required reading in military academies across human space and, surprisingly, in Vector space as well, in the book's final chapter. Taejun wrote something that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. We fought this war because we had no choice. We won because we refused to give up. But our greatest victory wasn't military. It was moral. We proved that strength and compassion can coexist. We proved that you can be fierce in war and merciful in peace. We proved that humanity deserves its place among the stars, not because we can destroy our enemies, but because we choose not to when given the chance. The galaxy would remember those words. And when other species faced their own challenges, their own wars, their own moments of crisis, they would look to humanity's example. The age of humanity had begun. Not with conquest, not with empire, but with the simple truth that survival, perseverance, and mercy were more powerful than any weapon, and the galaxy would never underestimate humans again.